Welcome back to the Sports Booth YouTube channel. My name is Luke, and today we're going to be looking into one signing we'd like to see for every team in Super Rugby Pacific for next year. So obviously international rugby right around the corner, right on our doorstep, more like it. But I thought let's touch base one more time on Super Rugby as we head off into the off-season and look into one signing that we'd like to see for each team. Break down why I think these teams should be signing these players. Couple of the teams have chucked out some real outsiders for the players. I've looked, trying to get players who are off contract and going to be off contract for next year or at the end of this year so that they could be signed. It's not easy to find all those details and all those numbers anywhere. So I've kind of done the best I can. If in the next few days someone does get signed or something like that and you're watching this a little bit later, then maybe I've just missed the boat on it. But I've tried my best to kind of find players who I know aren't contracted for next season. Let's start with all the New Zealand-based teams. So we're going to start with the Blues first. Now, you know, they won the round-robin style of play, but fell short in the finals against the Crusaders. So not a lot that they probably need to really improve on, and not a lot of losses for them. So the one big loss for them being Big Carl overseas. So prop stocks are just a little bit down, but again, they've got enough quality players there that I don't think it's going to make a major issue. So the big thing that we saw from the final was the line-outs. Now, saying that they've already signed or re-signed, or you know, he's coming back from a sabbatical in Patrick Tuipulotu, he should really help that and help the fact that they won't have as big issues with him there. But I still think they're probably still a lot short. And as great as Luke Romano, James Tucker and Sam Dari were all season, and even Tom Robinson at moments, I think if I was looking at a position that I said, you know, we can improve on and get better with, I would look at the locking position. So one player, and again, I don't think this is one of those ones that probably won't happen, but I think would be a great fit, is actually Tupavai from the Chiefs. Now, all the Chiefs fans are probably grasping at their ears, trying to make sure that they didn't hear me correctly, but I think he went to Wesley College in Auckland, so I think, yeah, just the fact that he's got a bit of a background there, I believe he was off contract. Again, I'm not 100% sure. I can't get clarity on that, but it was one that I hadn't been notified or anything like that. I hadn't seen any news. Again, this is probably one of the fewer ones to happen, but I think Tupavai would be a great pickup for the Blues and really finish off that already strong Blues 4-pack. Another name you can chuck out there is Charlie Faumuina. Is coming off contract over in France, and again, losing Carl overseas could be an option to try and bring a player like Charlie back, but Tupavai for the Blues. We then go into the Crusaders, where again, you know, second in the table on in regular season, and then winning the final. It's hard to improve on a team that's already so good. A couple of key losses, Bryn Hall and Pablo Matera. Now, as long as Ethan Blackadder comes back from injury all right, I don't think it's going to be an issue in the loosies. If you've got Ethan Blackadder at 6, Tom Christie at 7, and then Cullen Grace at 8, what he showed at 8, I think that's a weapon with Sam Whitelock and Scott Barrett around. So not a position of concern, but maybe a couple of intriguing pickups will be around the flanks. But I actually think the halfback position is key for them. They've got Mitch Drummond and Triple T. Now, I believe they're both slowly coming off contract this year as well, so we'll be discussions if they come back, and it wouldn't surprise me. So I've got a couple of names circled, and it's tough because what I see at the moment in Chiefs country in Hamilton is, again, another Chiefs player that could be potentially discussed. Xavier Rowe and Courts Ratama are the two I've kind of got bracketed. So if you think Brad Reba is still hanging about, and I think with the World Cup next year still having a shot, I see him at least, you know, having another round at Super Rugby, being, I think he's 31 at the moment. So, you know, there's still a couple good years in him. We've seen Aaron Smith's been able to carry his form all the way through to 34, 35. So it wouldn't surprise me if Brad Webb is still keen to hang about for a bit longer. And then these two young halfbacks, 121 in Ratama and Rowe 23, are looking for their spot. And I think Ratama was offered a contract straight away by the Crusaders, straight out the gate, turned that down to play for the Chiefs because he'd always grown up supporting them. But again, that's one kind of player there that could be signed to the Crusaders and make a difference for next year going ahead. On to the Chiefs now. Luckily for the Chiefs, I can't steal any more of their players to send anywhere else, but their team, again, third overall in the standings, lost in the semi-finals to the Crusaders, still a very good team, still looking very good. Not a lot of losses. 2 losses only at the moment with Jonah Lowe and Chase Tiatia. So, of course, with 2 outsides, I'm looking at an outside. So, the one I could find that I thought actually makes a heck of a lot of sense, I don't know if he'd ever do it because of the success he's currently having at his current team, Sever Reece. Now, Sever Reece, obviously, Crusader, has been, the past few years, has been fantastic since 2019 and getting that call up to the All Blacks and then heading off to the World Cup. So I don't see him moving, but you've got to remember he did play for Waikato, when he first came into New Zealand and was brought up in that Waikato ITM Cup system, schooled and everything in Fiji. So it's not like he's got a home base or, has any loyalty to the Chiefs Nation, but it was just an interesting prospect that he had played for Waikato and then, the Crusaders picked him up and the Chiefs missed out. That he is coming off contract, I believe, this year. There hasn't been any announcement, what I've seen. So that would be a huge pickup in a position which I think they need. When you look at their team, that they're good across the board, and I think that team that started the semi-finals is a very good team. But, they've got Iti Nano Saruto on one wing, and the other wing, if they could get a Sever Reece, that would be really dangerous. I don't think it's going to happen, but, if we are in this world, one player we'd like the Chiefs to sign has to be Sever Reece there. On to the Hurricanes. Now, this was an interesting one. Looking across their team, there are quite a few, I don't want to say holes because there's good players. It's just depends how they're performing and the level that you kind of see them at. So obviously as a Hurricane supporter, I see them all at the greatest level possible, but they're obviously not. So I looked into it and I go, okay, looking at that team that was named to play in the quarterfinal against the Brumbies, obviously finished 5th, lost in the quarterfinals for Brumbies. Blake Gibson was named at 6, Duplessis Creevy at 7 and 8 at Artie Sevilla. And to me, as great as 6 and 7 and Gibson and Creevy are, they're very similar ball players, as in they get over the ball, skillful with ball in hand, not big carriers. And I thought, man, this team kind of needs another carrier. Now, one name that instantly came into my head as a flanker, I thought, just to add a bit more firepower, add to that, Artie Sevilla gets such good go forward, who else can add to that? And it's a man who's coming close to retirement, has hinted at it, actually played for La Rochelle, I'd probably butcher that, La Rochelle, over in France, and he is Victor Vito, a former Hurricane. If they could get him back, he's coming off contract, has discussed retirement. I wouldn't mind seeing a one-year deal, a bit of another old head into the mix with some experience. And if Victor Vito could come back, playing in that 6th role there, I couldn't really find many other people. The other name that I did think, I don't know if he was coming off contract, I couldn't find anything. Charlie Gamble, now obviously had an unreal season for the Waratahs, and deservedly so, is getting mentioned in Wallabies chats, but you've got to remember, as much as I'm sure we can discuss him being a Wallaby, he was born in New Zealand, grew up in New Zealand, played for the Crusaders, or was in the Crusaders development, of course he was, who becomes a good player, and then wasn't given the opportunity, so moved across to Sydney, living the life up there, 26. We don't know if he wants to play for the Wallabies. He may be still wanting to play for the All Blacks, so if he's wanting to play for the All Blacks and the season he had and put his hand up, an opportunity comes across where he can come back to New Zealand, I think number 6 spot in the Hurricanes could be an option. The Highlanders, the New Zealand New Zealand-based franchise, or the New Zealand team that has probably the most holes to fill. Saying that though, it was tough to kind of go where we would go with what position. Now, obviously, a new coach will come in and bring their own philosophy and belief to it. Now, there was looking at first 5, you've obviously got Marty Banks and Mitch Hunt, and it's probably not, it doesn't fill you with belief that this team can win, but when Mitch Hunt is going well, they can go really well. And I know Brent Cameron's come back from Japan, 1 Test All Black, playing for Manawatu, so it'll be interesting because he'll get a contract somewhere. It wouldn't surprise me if the Highlanders offered it, but it's not actually the player I've selected here for the one signing I'd like to see. The signing I would like to see is, I think Scott Gregory has played it well enough to stay in the team, but I want him on the wing. And with Thomas Umaga Jensen doing what Thomas Umaga Jensen did last year, I'm going for his brother, Peter Umaga Jensen, and I think that would be the signing of the season if the Highlanders could make that that matchup that pairing work. Now, the reason I say this is obviously Peter didn't get great opportunity with the Hurricanes this year. I don't know if he was fully healthy. If he was, he's definitely missed out on some game time with Balin Sullivan, their emergence to that, and Geordie Barrett moving to 12. So if Peter wants to kind of position himself and push back for the All Blacks, I think a shot at the Highlanders is not a bad shout. Moana Pasifika. Now, this is a tough one purely because obviously they signed a whole bunch of players just coming into their first season, but a name stuck out to me, and he's recently signed with North Harbour, and that is Tavita Lee, who absolutely killed the game since moving over to Japan and playing in the Japan League One competition. He is a fantastic ball carrier, a fantastic winger. I look at the team that they named to play the Brumbies, which I think was the best team that they named. I couldn't get details of any Japanese contract, but the fact that he's back playing NPC for North Harbour, I think it's a great sign. And the fact that it's in that catchment with Mount Smart and everything like that, I think this is their opportunity and a big pickup. Let's jump into the Australian-based teams. Now, Brumbies was probably the toughest one I've done here. Stacked team, a few losses with Scott Seo, Falau Fainga, Ire Simone and Tom Banks. Probably need someone to replace that fullback position when I'm looking at it. Fullback or centre. Hudson Creighton was signed, and Ollie Satford played in the semi-final when Ikitau was ruled out due to a red card. But I think the fullback needs it, and you could put Tom Wright there, but I want Tom Wright on a wing showing what he did. So I went again, and I went early. I couldn't find anyone that I liked for finishing 2022. So I went Will Harrison, who's actually the New South Wales Waratahs, played a couple of games this year before injury struck. He was is a fly half, but I think he could work really well at fullback. Now, I know he's not off contract until 2023, so he'd have to leave that early, obviously, but I just thought Will Harrison would make a lot of sense, wouldn't hurt the salary cap that they're struggling with, not being able to re-sign Scott Seo. So I thought that was a good signing. The Reds. Now, the Reds, it was pretty clear just watching the game against the Crusaders in the quarterfinal that they needed some prop help. Now, everyone can say, okay, well, Taniela Tupou wasn't playing that game. Very true, understand that, but I still want some prop help. I've put Scott Seo as the name I would like to see signed. It'll be tough to get him, tough to get your hands on him. I think the Western Force, and I've got another team who I think would be who'd be a good signing for. But yeah, Scott Seo to the Reds would be my ideal signing. One I have bracketed is actually Matt Phillip. Now, obviously a Wallabies player. He's never really had a good shot with Super Rugby teams just because the Rebels have been bad. I'd love to see him under Brad Fawn. I think he'd have a breakout season. He's not off contract until next year. But yeah, I would love to see Matt Phillip get a chance at the Reds in a Reds jersey as well. Onto the Force, and this is probably the most kind of out there. Well, I'm going to say second to most out there call. They've lost a few players. Greg Holmes, Santiago Medrano, Jeremy Flush, Fergus Lee Warner, Jake McIntyre, Richard Kahui, Kyle Goodwin, and Byron Ralston. Now, they need a centre, I think, from the players they've lost. Ralston started the final game at centre. Kahui, Goodwin, centres. They need a centre. They obviously need a prop as well. So Scott Seo's at the top there. I know they're going to make a play for Taniela Tupou next year to try and get him across to the Western Force. I've put a New Zealand player's name, a former All Black, because of the success they've had with Frush and Kahui. I put Ryan Crotty's name down. Now, I don't know if this happens. I couldn't find contract details. I think when he signed after the Rugby World Cup in 2019 for a 3-year deal, so that should have ended this year, or should end this year. But saying that, I couldn't find any details on there, any news on Crotty. But I just thought, a New Zealand centre, they've done this before where they bring in international players and it works. And I thought, a high-level player who's a good character is going to be Ryan Crotty. So I thought that was the pick of the bunch that I could go out and find. And I thought seeing him in a Western Force jersey would be fantastic. The Tars, now another team that I struggled with. Looking at their team, it's a pretty good team. They've had a few losses, so we'll run through that. Ryan Smith, Jeffrey Cridge, Jeremy Williams, Carlo Tizano, James Ram, Alex Newsom. So Newsom kind of shouts out as the biggest one there, heading over to France. I thought, they could go outside back, but they've brought in Biel and Nandolo, so they don't really need much of that. And I know Newsom covered for centre. So I looked at centre and I thought, as long as Fekete and Parisi stay healthy, it's not an issue. So it's more a backup centre if they'd be searching for. and all I could find was really backups. I don't think there was any improvements over the players they had start that quarterfinal game. So I had Scott Seo kind of bracketed, but I actually decided to go for a backup hooker who I think didn't have a good season with the Western Force. Feleti Katui, Australian A player, I think adds a bit more. I know they've got Dave Parecki, but you need a 1-2 punch in the hooker section, and that seemed to drop off for me a little bit for the Waratahs was their reserve hooker. So I went with Feleti just to see if he could get some form back and even push Parecki to be just as good, if not better player, roughly same age, the two. So, yeah, I thought that was the signing for them. Now, the Rebels. Now, this is probably the most out there signing, but it was it really shouted itself at me. Now, let's run through their players out. James Hansen, Efi Mafu, Michael Wells, Ross Haylett-Petty, Joe Powell, Matt Tamua, and young Tunamapea. So there was a lot of centres, and I was looking for centres, and then I actually I found a back rower, and I said, back row, they've lost Michael Wells. They need a player. They've got some money now with Matt Tamua leaving. They need someone who's going to step up and get people into the stadium and be some excitement. Talk about Taniela Tupou, talk about this and that. Name I've got down is actually a leaguey, Angus Crichton. Now, the talk of the town has obviously been he doesn't have a contract anymore with the Roosters, and the Roosters are struggling to fit him into the salary cap. So I kind of thought that this would be a great kind of merging of the two. He obviously played Australian schoolboys coming through, could play centre or back rower, and kind of gives them that option of where he wants to play, where they've got the decision now to make wherever he wants to play and where they think he best suits. So Angus Crichton coming across, it makes sense with a World Cup in Australia in about 5 years' time. I thought Angus Crichton would be a great signing if they could get their hands on him. And I'm sure Australian rugby would be like, this is our first tick in the right direction to grow in this game, especially in Melbourne. I thought that would be a great signing, and all of Australia would be for that one. Lastly, the Fijian Drua. Now, it's really tough to find players again for the Fijian Drua because I know they want to build a Fijian base. So there was two names that when I was looking for all the players off contract that stuck out for me. One being obviously Semi Radradra, who's not off contract till next year. But if they are not putting their hat in the ring for Semi to come and play in Super Rugby, got to be crazy. There's been lots of talk about NRL clubs wanting to get their hands back on Semi, but I think this is a great opportunity for them to try and get their hands on him. But for this year, there's a player by the name of Leon Nakarawa, who is a big lock, aging about 34, who's done about 10 years over in the European competitions. So he was in Scotland and then finishing up in France this year. Premiership clubs are kind of looking at him, so I just thought if the Drua can go and get him back and get a good force in their locking team who's got the experience, got big time experience, it would be a great signing to kind of take another step in that right direction for the Fijian side while keeping the main base Fijian Drua strong. So yeah, that is my one signing kind of for each team that I think could really help benefit them for next year. Let me know yours in the comment section. Let me know if I've screwed up and someone shouldn't be signed or someone should be signed. But yeah, and let me know how you think Angus Crichton would go in a Rebels jersey. Other than that, we will talk to you later. Thanks for joining me. Bye.